Skinner had a lot of followers, and a lot of people, wanted to befriend him and be around him. And he was, he wasn't, Kantor was a very modest person. And Skinner was not very modest in that regard. He was...
Proyecto dedicado a la divulgación, formación y terapia psicológica. Consulta nuestros servicios en nuestra web y redes sociales.
Talking about Kantor, how was he personally?
Oh, he was great. When I was a graduate student at Western Michigan, he lived in Chicago, which was a couple of hours away. And I visited him on several occasions. And toward the end of his life, he was quite deaf. And he had a kind of, when I went to interview with him, talk to him, he had a sort of apparatus where I spoke into a microphone, into a speaker, and then he had a headset on. So, I was speaking, into a speaker to a headset that he could hear. So we had good conversations. And he was very nice. He was very charming, very, very thoughtful, very wanting to be helpful and very, however he could. He was delighted to have good conversation. And so I really enjoyed visiting him. I asked him one time, I said, well, how do you feel that you don't have a lot of followers? You don't have a lot of students and followers of your work. And he said, something like that he was his own best critic of his work. In other words, he could develop his own work on his own as a critic of his own work. and he said, I said, well, when do you think people will appreciate your work? And I was visiting him in the 70s, late 70s. And he said he didn't think people would really appreciate interbehaviorism for another 50 years. So we're kind of on the 50-year mark from there. So I don't know. I think the students who get, my own students here at University of Nevada, Reno, I think they, when they finally do understand interbehaviorism, I think that they're very much changed. And I think it changes the way they look at the world and their work. So it's a profound learning experience to be in touch with it. And I wish more people had the opportunity to study it and think about it.
And Skinner, which is your opinion about him? How was he personally?
Well, Skinner, he was a little bit more of I don't know what to say, really. Skinner had a lot of followers, and a lot of people, wanted to befriend him and be around him. And he was, he wasn't, Kantor was a very modest person. And Skinner was not very modest in that regard. He was I don't know, he liked an audience better.
He was more comfortable with
yes,
that.
Definitely, yeah.
With great audiences.
Yeah.
Right, right.
He liked giving talks and having people clap.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. He was more popular. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Do you think interbehaviorists and radical behaviorists can understand each other? And would it be positive to behavior analysis to have a better communication between those philosophies?
I think it would be. better, but I think the benefit of that would be for radical behaviorists. I mean, I don't think inner behaviorists are going to get much from radical behaviorists, because I think the field theoretical position is more advanced than the causal construction. But radical behaviorism has been a foundation for a lot of applied psychology and a lot of basic research. And I think those, those are the kinds of problems, those are the kinds of issues that inner behaviorists haven't really dealt with so much. And so some of that methodology, some of the apparatus, some of the strategies that behavior analysts have developed, some of the utility of the things that they have found, I think benefits the culture. I don't think it has any benefit for the philosophy of science, though.
Right.
Yes. No,
okay.
Interbehaviorism have any important limitation?
Limitation? Is that what you said?
Limitation, yes.
You see, I just love interbehaviorism. It's hard for me to come up with that. Well, the limitation is really in how widespread it is, because these things, if people don't have access to these notions, it's not something that is so seems so vital to the culture that it can easily just go away. Because the Counter's books are increasingly unavailable, they're out of print and they're unavailable, and there aren't a lot of teachers who are teaching it. So its main limitation is lack of access to it. That's not a limitation of the system itself. I think the system is. I have a couple of criticisms of the system, actually. I guess I should talk about those. Kantor sometimes writes, had written that, and I talked to him about this, had written that that history was sort of one thing and the present circumstance was another. Okay, and to me, the present circumstance is the history. It's just an evolution of everything that's been going on. So you are your history in this moment. There's not a previous history. It doesn't do anything. You are that. You are that history. That your repertoire is just this evolving thing. So there's a little bit of sometimes the history, like in radical behaviorism, we say things like, something that happened, some historical circumstances happened, and that made this happen. And we don't know what those historical circumstances, but that must have been what happened. Well, I don't like to talk about that. I like to talk about the history as being present. And the other thing that Kantor has said, that actually Kantor agreed with me on that when we had a discussion. But the other thing is the setting. What do we mean by this setting? I mean, what is the significance of this setting? And Kantor talks about the setting as hindering a particular interaction or facilitating a particular interaction happening. Okay. And for me, I don't like those terms. I think the setting is part of the event. If you change the setting, you've got a new event. It's not that it's a part of it and it makes something else happen. It's the whole thing, So, and it's constantly changing as you're constantly interacting with the world around you. You're constantly behaving with respect to stimulation, and everything you do is also changing the setting condition. The setting condition is part of the interaction. It's part of the whole thing. So I don't see the setting as enhancing something or facilitating something or hindering something. It is what it is. It's part of the thing you're looking at. It doesn't have any role or power or anything. So that's a slightly different version of interbehaviorism, I guess. For me, though, thinking those things about the setting and the history is really the field. And I think if you start talking about something, some aspect of the field doing something to other aspects of the field, that's the wrong track. So.
Right. And talking about the spreading of interbehaviorism, are there many empirical work based on this philosophy?
Well, any empirical work could be analyzed from an interbehavioral perspective.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then, well, you have the issue that there aren't a lot of interbehaviorists out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so there's not a whole sort of experimental group of interbehaviorists and a whole applied group of interbehaviorists. I mean, there are in certain places, like in Mexico and maybe in Spain and some other places. And, you know, my students do basic work and everything else. But, you know, you have to talk in a certain way when you try to publish those articles.
Right.
So you do an experiment and you try to publish that in a JAB. Well, they're going to want you to talk a certain way. You know, so there are, you know, in my own students for their dissertations and their thesis projects and some of the other work that we do talk as interbehaviorists as best we can. Definitely in their theses and dissertations. When you then go to try to publish that in a, you know, behavioral journal, you kind of have to sort of alter how you speak a little bit, because they make you do it.
Right. It's like at other level, but it remembers me to the status of behavior analysis and psychology in general, right? It's like you have to talk in other words, no? You have to use other words to be accepted, right?
Right.
So what do you think? Is that what occurs with behavior analysis in psychology?
Yeah. Well, yeah, same thing happened with behavior analysis. So I'm sure of your question. But originally you couldn't talk in Skinner's terms. You know, they wouldn't publish that. Mm-hmm. Also because of the methodology, you know, within subject methodology. So they had to create their own journals. And so they did. And the behavior analysts, they created the Journal of Experimental Analysis, a behavior journal of applied behavior analysis. And Kantor's journal was the Psychological Record. That's the journal that he started. And he was able to publish in there many theoretical pieces there. And that journal has always been, it's not just applied or basic, it's a lot of theory, history, all kinds of things, that journal. I think the Psychological Record is a great journal, really. But again, you have to, the editor of the Psychological Record prior to this current editor was somebody by the name of Ruth Rayfeld, and she was a former student of mine. And so she kept up the sort of interbehavioral flavor of it. And now the current editor is Mitch Freiling, who is also a student of mine. So we're trying to hold that journal as best you can with willingness to publish interbehavioral materials.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think there are Spanish journals, but in English we're kind of limited.
No problem. But what do you think is the weight of behavior analysis in psychology?
I think it's I think the failure to deal adequately with complex human behavior is hurting its value, you know, depreciating its value. And I think contextual behavior science, by picking up on the stimulus substitution issue, I think that has meant that contextual behavior science is becoming more and more valuable or popular or known because it's focused on, you know, language and complex human behavior. even though contextual behavior science is kind of a new version of radical behaviorism, dealing with complex human behavior, but still being a causal system. Mm-hmm. So it didn't go all the way. missed the field notion just as tidge. So I think radical behaviorism is still a powerful system for application and investigation. I don't think it has anything valuable to say theoretically. Contextual behavior science has something valuable to say contextually, but it's insufficient. It's not big enough. It's not wide enough to include matters of history, for example. The setting in contextual behavior science is kind of a controlling variable, not part of the event that you're looking at. So there's some differences there. Inner behaviorism isn't going to take the place of all of those things, but it would be a good reflection for scientists in those domains to know about, I think.
Gracias por ver este vídeo, os dejamos por aquí un enlace a nuestra última formación y por aquí algunos vídeos que os pueden resultar de interés. Si estáis buscando ayuda psicológica, también podéis mirar en la descripción del vídeo, donde encontraréis nuestra web y podréis solicitar asistencia terapéutica de un profesional confiable y que os ofrecerá ayuda psicológica basada en evidencia científica.